If members of council could take their seats, please, we'll reconvene the meeting. The next item is that was held by Councillor Ternashenko was Environment and Climate Protection Committee Report 17, Energy Evolution, Ottawa's Community Energy Transition Strategy, Phase 1. And we've lost Councillor Ternashenko. Oh, no, there he is.
There we go. System's back up. Thank you very much. A couple of things I want to do here. I'll ask a couple of questions first, and then I want to sum up on this report, or although maybe if there are other questions, I'll wait to do if I may do a sum up on the item afterwards. First of all, Mr. Willis, as you know, at the, well, in advance of the committee and then delegations at the committee expressed a particular concern about the city's staffing ability to actually deliver on quite an extensive set of commitments that we are making in this, in our energy evolution strategy. And you and I had conversations to the effect of you being aware of that weakness, if you will, or need. Can you describe to me what, I know there are those things that are particularly within your own department, and then there are others where the actual staffing is going to come from other departments, but can you describe what in the meantime you have sort of settled on as your approach to ensuring that we neither find ourselves without the right people to do the job, or excessively relying on a small group of people who, like any small group, might burn themselves out if we keep throwing too many demands at them?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, just to go back to the principle of the fact that the Energy Evolution Strategy is a corporate-wide strategy, and there are 4 city departments that have a direct role in it, and 2 of the city's agencies, Hydro Ottawa and Ottawa Community Housing, that also have a role in the implementation of some of the Phase 1 issues. So my colleagues, Mr. Chenier, Mr. Wiley, can certainly talk to their departments if required, but I know from planning, infrastructure, and economic development's perspective, although in the Phase 1 strategy we had a dedicated team to write the Phase 1 strategy, in the implementation, Mr. Smith's team has the ability to draw on the entire group of long-range planning and economic development to do the tasks required. And by actually the organizational change, by merging those 2 functions together, actually gives more bandwidth for the group to actually take on this project. It's an issue of prioritization. So we have a series of commitments over the next 3 years. We have a 2018 list, and we will deliver the 2018 list. And as a result of the motion by Councillor Brockington at committee, we'll be reporting at the end of the year on how we've done.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know if there are others who are able to add to that. I guess Mr. Wiley's not here at the moment, but all right. Mr. Chenier.
Mr. Mayor, I can add that the Building Engineering and Energy Management Group, which resides in my department, does have a team that works full-time on energy projects at about $1 million worth of projects a year, but they are staffed up to a level where certainly taking on additional responsibilities from additional funding will not be an issue. They are able to handle the additional capacity that this would provide.
And in every one of these cases, first of all, one item that was brought up was whether we have the staff ability to apply to, this is a nice problem to have. There are now so many funding sources federally and provincially that it would be a shame to, quote, leave those on the table because we didn't have the staff to submit the applications. Not to mention, of course, then actually deliver on it should we achieve that funding. You reassured committee that we did have that ability. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, as I explained at committee, whenever there's a senior government funding program of any flavor, the City Manager's Office is quick to identify to the entire organization of GMs that the funding is available out there, and we coordinate responses based on the most applicable department. In many cases, our group's involved because of infrastructure funding, perhaps, so our asset management group steps up. Mr. Chenier's group, Mr. Wiley's group, Ms. Similuk's group all have people who would work on these, and I can assure you, whenever there's an opportunity, we go after it.
And should we find ourselves particularly receiving funding for, say, building retrofit from one of the other levels, or something to do with greater implementation of electric vehicle chargers, something along those lines, that we could add that to the workload of, for example, BEAM or transportation without slowing down the implementation?
Mr. Mayor, yes, the 2018 work plan for the BEAM Group includes the $1 million of city funding and already anticipates at least another $500,000 from the provincial funding we recently applied for. If we get it, we are staffed up to do it. If we don't, we will look at other sources and continually apply for other opportunities.
Okay, thank you. I will sum up after questions. I see there's at least Councillor Fleury.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fleury, please.
Merci.
Well, thanks very much, Mayor, Deputy Mayor. Well, first of
times. Mr. Willis, thank you for the plan, and I want to personally thank the chair of the committee who has worked closely with you and various staff to bring forward this plan. I am critical of the plan, and I'm critical of a plan because we have existing operational pressures that we could invest in and resolve very quickly. And I'll ask members of council to just look up for a second. Look up at all the lights that are in this room, none of which are LED. You go across all of our centers, libraries, arenas, and the majority of the retrofits that are needed that would unlock funds for the operations are hidden right above us all the time. And I get very frustrated. We've done a good job in Kevin's group to unlock the roads, the LED on the roads, through the program through Hydro Ottawa. But I simply feel that there's money that we're leaving on the table that is draining us operationally that we could leverage and unlock if we were able to to do the investment fully. And what frustrates me even more is that I'll use OCH as an example, and there's no hiding the fact that OCH tenants, it's a bill of around $10.8 million in energy every year. So if we were able to invest in some of those energy retrofits, we have, but not to the extent that I would like, we would remove right away a financial pressure on the city. So I think there's very easy ones that we can't seem to unlock holistically. We have special $1 million programs, people apply for them, we put them in measure. But holistically across the corporation, I feel that we're in our parks, for example, outdoor parks, we've done all our roads, the retrofits in our parks aren't in place. So that's where I'm critical of the energy evolution plan. Is I find that it misses the holistic approach that would not only be good for the environment, but for those who might not be of their interest, it's actually a good fiscal reason to do it. And I find that it falls short on that program. So in my mind, I will dissent on that basis. I think the plan is a good one. I just don't think it's aggressive enough to unlock the holistic measures that I would love to see happen. So keep at it. If we can unlock a further partnership with Hydro Ottawa or with other partners to be more aggressive. I mean, I'm using the energy, the low-hanging fruit around the LED conversions. I just think we could do more. So I'm not asking for a response unless you want to, but for me, that's where I find there's a gap.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, if I may respond very briefly, action item number 31 in the plan is establishing a corporate smart energy office, and that's Action item number 31 in the plan is establishing a corporate smart energy office, and that conceptually is a virtual office. It doesn't necessarily mean part of the org chart. And what that means is actually bringing the financial side, the BEAM side, our side, infrastructure side together and trying to mine for these opportunities, these holistic things that things you're referring to, because we believe we have low-hanging fruit we can get, and we believe there are operational savings, and those operational savings are also good for the environment. So that actually is in the strategy, what you're asking for, and we're committed to going down that path.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, and thank you for pushing me on that. The further point is that I feel it's far that we come back in 2019. I think we can, these plans are very, very easily doable because they're low-hanging fruits, and if they're implementable in 2018, we should implement them in 2018. So, I don't want to go back and forth because I know we're both passionate about this. I'm just challenging the city to do more. That's the message that I want to send to you and your team. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We had an opportunity to discuss the plan a little bit at Environment Committee, whenever that was, a few weeks ago now. And one of the questions that I asked then, and I'm just wondering if there's an update, is there was this offer that we had heard about from Hydro Ottawa to play a very active role in helping with the retrofits of municipal buildings, of City of Ottawa buildings. And at the time, I think the City Treasurer mentioned that there was a discussion going on about that, and I just wondered firstly if there had been any update and if there's any clear indication at this stage as to how those discussions are going, and if there's anything to announce this afternoon with regard to that partnership.
Mr. Mayor, I can update that we have been meeting with Hydro Ottawa since the spring. We've had some good negotiations. This fall, they have submitted just recently have submitted a final proposal to us, which we are currently analyzing, and we hope to be getting back to them to hopefully bring this to a fruitful conclusion early in the new year.
Okay, great. And just so that I stop bugging you with the question, do you anticipate bringing that back through Environment Committee, or how will that be transmitted to Council?
Mr. Mayor, we haven't worked out the specifics of the approvals because we're not absolutely clear yet on what portions will be negotiated and what directions it will go in. But certainly, it'd be our intent certainly to report out on progress, and if there's authorities or approvals required, then yes, we would prepare a report to come forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So with that, is this item then received? Oh, sorry. Councillor Turnashenko, you wanted to wrap up?
I remember Councillor Hume, who used to sit next to me, reminding me on some occasions, take yes for an answer. When you're about to win a vote, don't interrupt and start saying something. I'll go against his advice ever so briefly to do what absolutely has to be done here, and that is to thank our staff in particular and community members who have been engaged in a process that has been far longer than we'd liked. It did start over 2 years ago. We had hoped to deliver this report earlier, and perhaps we'd hoped that it would be more comprehensive and cover all of the issues. But it is an extremely valuable step forward. It does require more funding. It does require more detail. But great changes start with the first step. And I do particularly want to thank all of our staff. I know I will forget someone if I start naming them all. So you certainly know who you are if you have worked on energy evolution, either people in the earlier rounds or those who brought this through to the end. And I want to thank you for that excellent work, and of course encourage you, once you've had your Christmas vacation, to get right back at it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with that, is this item carried? Carried. Dissent by Councillor Fleury. Okay, the next item is item number 27 from the Finance and Economic Development Committee, Report 30, the Hotel and Short-Term Accommodation Tax. Just by way of introduction, since this report was referred to Council without a recommendation, we'll first have a motion from Councillor El Shantiri, seconded by myself, to put the original staff recommendations before Council for consideration. Then Councillor El Shantiri and Councillor Ternashenko will bring forward a motion to amend the recommendations and propose a framework to exempt traditional bed and breakfasts. I want to thank them for doing that and for trying to propose solutions along with Councillor Moffat at last week's FEDCO meeting. We've heard loud and clear from the bed and breakfast operators who came to FEDCO last week, and since then that they simply don't have the administrative capacity to take on this tax. I want to particularly thank our Deputy Treasurer, Wendy Stephenson, and her team for engaging with the bed and breakfast community over this last week and look for options to fix this. Since the last FEDCO as well, for Council's information, we've also received a legal opinion that states that we do not give up the authority to tax Airbnb and other online home sharing platforms by creating this exemption mechanism for traditional B&Bs. As we heard at FEDCO last week, there is overwhelming support from the rest of the tourism sector to go forward with this proposal for a municipal accommodation tax. But I'm pleased we were able to come to this solution for the small players in the industry, and I want to thank everyone who provided their feedback for their efforts and their patience. So, Councillor El Shantiri, if you can read your motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and that was a good introduction, Mr. Deputy Mayor, because at FEDCO, many of my colleagues, they heard loud and clear the folks from the bed and breakfast, and we have asked staff because we heard so much about the Alberta model, and I want to thank staff for echo your sentiment about thanking our staff for bringing up the Alberta model to us. So with that, Mr. Mayor, the first motion is, as you introduced, so therefore be resolved that Council approve the following report recommendation as referred by Finance and Economic Development Committee. 1, adopt a 4% municipal accommodation tax via bylaw effective January 1st, 2018, and delegate the authority to the mayor and the city manager to negotiate and to enter into necessary agreements in consultation with the city clerk and solicitor to implement the mandatory municipal accommodation tax in the city of Ottawa, and to provide the revenue proceed in the account defined in the Municipal Act, Regulation 435/17, to the local tourism entity as further described in the report for service or activities supporting the promotion and development of tourism to Ottawa. That motion is moved by myself, second by Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Councillor El Shantiri. So, Ms. Stephenson, before we take questions, I just want to ask if your office is in support of the motion.
Sorry, Mr. Deputy Mayor, we still have the second motion.
My apologies.
So that was just to have it on the table, and the second motion basically to, so if I can read the second motion.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. That's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Ternashenko. And if I can read it, I know it's a little bit long, but just to put it in a context, where the report entitled Hotel and Short-Term Accommodation Tax recommends a 4% municipal accommodation tax as further described in the report being effective January 1st, 2018, and where smaller independent bed and breakfast operators who have not previously charged a destination marketing fee to their guests have requested that the city provide an exemption process to reduce their administrative burden, as they do not have full-time accounting staff, and therefore be it resolved that the following recommendation 3 be added to the report. 3, that the municipal accommodation tax bylaw include in document 2 provide that bed and breakfast operators may apply to the city for an exemption from the payment of the municipal accommodation tax, provided that the application is in a form prescribed by the city treasurer and meet the following eligibility criteria to satisfaction of the city treasurer. A, the bed and breakfast establishment meet the definition of zoning bylaw 2008-250 as amended. B, the bed and breakfast establishment is occupied and operated by the property owner and is classified in the residential property tax class. And C, the accommodation purchases are invoiced by the bed and breakfast establishment and not a third-party home sharing listing entity. So basically, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that will after discussion, our staff with the 42 or 43 bed and breakfast owner, we come up with a compromise. And as you mentioned, at FEDCO, a number of my colleagues, they were the same concern, but I think we heard the community loud and clear about this, and I'm looking for your support to this motion. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So before we go to the questions, Ms. Stephenson, comment from your office?
So, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. We are in agreement with the motion and supportive of it.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Brockington, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, and again, thank you to Councillor El Shantiri for moving these two motions. Certainly, I see the benefits of proceeding with a mandatory fund or a tax, a stable fund to market Ottawa as a destination of choice, not just to tourists, but to conferences and conventions. And I like that it's not paid for by taxpayers, that it's paid for by visitors, and we use their time in our city to again reinvest into the city through what will be collected and then used by Ottawa tourism. I do have some concerns, or at least there may be some risks with this, and I just want to ask staff a few questions. First, is there any risk to the city proceeding with a mandatory 4% tax on our motel stays in dissuading tour groups, convention groups from coming, knowing that they're going to have an extra 4% added onto their bill? Has there been any analysis, particularly in cities where this has been initiated, where you can get some intelligence? Has this had any impact at all on future visits from tourists or conference?
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. A voluntary destination marketing fee was introduced in Ottawa in 2004. And what we've seen is an investment, and I'm going to suggest to you a strategic investment in marketing Ottawa as a top choice destination. And we have seen our tourism increase over that time. We are the first moving forward with this tax, but I can tell you there are other municipalities who will also follow in our footsteps and implement mandatory tax. And really what this is going to do is this is going to create a level playing field in terms of the investment that we're making, and really set the budget in terms of what we'll be able to spend and invest to market Ottawa.
So all the other DMFs that exist in Canada are all voluntary?
In Ontario, yes.
Okay. And when we talk about the word mandatory, we are talking about the mandatory collection by the accommodation entity itself. Will it be mandatory on the guest to pay it, or will they still have an option?
It's mandatory for the guest to pay.
Okay.
Yes.
What happens if an accommodation entity in Ottawa, if this is passed, refuses to participate in the program? What's the recourse?
We do have provisions in our bylaw in terms of fine and penalties, something that I hope we really don't have to go down that road in terms of getting folks to participate in this, but we've provided for that in our draft bylaw. Okay.
And what is the role of the City of Ottawa, the corporation, after this is passed, after a bylaw goes into effect? If there are concerns raised within the industry that maybe cannot be settled by Ottawa Tourism, is there any other way that the city is going to be involved, or is this just we pass this bylaw and then it's up to Ottawa Tourism to govern and through their own members decide any issues or any disputes that may come up going forward?
In terms of the tax, the city will have governance over that, as well as the bylaw is set in terms of the mechanisms for collection, the audit provisions. What will happen in terms of the revenues that come in, we have recommended that the Ottawa-Gatineau Hotel Association be our collector for this revenue. And Ottawa Tourism will work in conjunction with its membership in terms of how that money is divided up and how that money is spent. The city will have representation on those committees and have a say.
Excellent, good. Thank you for the information, and thank you for preparing this report.
Thank you very much. Councillor Eagle, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a very, very quick comment, because it's been a very long day, but I just want to thank my colleagues who agreed with me at committee last week that we should refer this to council to give staff an opportunity to try and solve this problem and to meet with the bed and breakfast operators. So I just want to take this very quick opportunity to thank Wendy and her team, and thank Mr. O'Connor and his legal team for coming up with some options. And I want to thank I see some of the bed and breakfast operators up in the audience. I want to thank you for meeting with and sharing your ideas and working collaboratively with city staff. Because in that week we've been able to, I think, come up with a resolution. You're nodding your head that works for everyone, and recognizes the importance of small businesses in our community, and also the challenges of small businesses in our community. So thank you, and I'll be quiet now.
All right, thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Kakish, please.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And many of us received an email from a resident, Mr. Brocklebank, with regards to the authority that the city has to impose this to an outside tax, to an outside agency. And I was wondering, you circulated a memo to us explaining the rationale and the legal ground that we have to do that. But I was wondering if you can share that with us so the public's aware as well with why we're able to do that with the delegated authority. If you stop talking, he might. So.
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. The Municipal Act allows us to appoint a tax collector, and we don't have to go outside of that in terms of engaging who we want to engage. We've elected to recommend that OGHA be the tax collector in this case. They have the experience. They've been doing it for 10 years, and the processes are already in place, and that's part of the recommendations in terms of the report that's sitting in front of you.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you very much. Councillor Moffat, please.
Thank you. Nothing really for staff, more for the Ottawa Gatineau Hotel Association. I know Mr. Ball is in the audience here. On the day that we were discussing this at the Finance and Economic Development Committee, I had to reach out to one of the providers, one of the operators in Rideau Goulburn, Strathmere. They unfortunately were unaware. They're not a part of the voluntary fee. They understand what's going forward. They appreciate the free membership into Ottawa Tourism. They're going to prepare themselves to start to administer this fee on January 1st. The one thing, though, they're a 34-bed operation. So with the OGHA, apparently, from what I understood at Fedco, there is a 50-room threshold for membership. They'd be interested if that would be through this, if there'd be some consideration to be amenable to allow them to have a membership within the OGHA since they'd be now paying into this fee. So it's not anything we can do here. It's more up to the OGHA, but I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that so that Mr. Ball could hear that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So on the motion, carried. And the report is amended, carried. Thank you very much. Next item was Planning Committee Report 55, item number 28, Building Better Revitalized Neighborhoods, Neighborhood Revitalization Strategies for Hetherington and Vanier South Overbrook. This was only held because some of the funding mechanism was in the budget. There's no impediment to carrying this now. Carried? Carried. Thank you very much. The next item is the zoning bylaw amendment, 1040 Bank Street. We have two motions. Councillor Harder and Tierney have a motion to put the original staff recommendation before council for approval, and then Councillor Chernyshenko Harder with an amending motion. So Councillor Harder, your motion, please.
This was a notice of motion last meeting on the establishment of councillor sponsors group for R4 study. Moved by myself. What? Which one is it?
The 1040 Bank.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Hang on, I'll get to say that again. This is the 1040 Bank Street, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Tierney. Be resolved, the council approved the following report recommendation as referred by Planning Committee, that council approve an amendment to zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 1040 Bank Street to permit a mixed-use development as detailed in documents 2 and 3.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Thank you. I'll begin by reading the motion, and then I will have some questions to staff, and then sum up on this. See if other members have questions. So on second motion, zoning bylaw amendment, 1040 Bank Street, zoning Article 2, zoning bylaw amendment, revision to height schedule. Whereas the report recommends a zoning bylaw amendment to accommodate development next to the existing church at 1040 Bank Street, and whereas at its meeting of the 28th November 2017, Planning Committee directed staff to work with the applicant to determine if the height of the proposed development could be reduced to address concerns raised by the community, and whereas the applicant has revised its proposed development so that it is 0.1 meters below the parapet of the existing church and introduced a step back of 1 meter above the 5th story for that part of the building facing the Rideau Canal, and whereas staff support the revisions to the proposed development, and whereas the proposed development is located on a unique site next to the Rideau Canal, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and whereas the proposed development is situated so as to ensure the church's prominence as viewed from Bank Street and the entrance to the community, and whereas, as with every development application, this will not set a precedent for development along Bank Street in Old Ottawa South, and whereas the proposed development step-back design above the 3rd story on Galt Street minimizes massing and maintains the 45-degree visual plane, therefore be it resolved that document 2, details of recommended zoning of the report, be amended as follows. I don't believe I need to read in. Do I need to read in the technical elements here? You have it in front of you, the technical document here. Be it further resolved that document 3, schedule of the report, be replaced with the new schedule attached to this motion, and be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to section 3417 of the Planning Act, and you will see there is that schedule attached to it.
Thank you very much, Councillor. So both motions are tabled, so we'll start a speakers list. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you. So I just want to get some clarity. When this was sent back from Planning Committee, and I wasn't at Planning Committee, so it was sent back, and when we received the submission again yesterday, it had only gone down by 50 centimeters the height. Is that correct?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, that is correct.
Okay, and then, but the step backs on the west side, Galt, had all been reduced as well. So it was kind of pushed down and out, if you will. Was that a fair?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, that is correct. So that has now reverted back to what was in the original staff report.
Okay, and so now the reduction in height it's not a meter yet, or a meter and a half, is it?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, it's about 0.6. Just want to reiterate that it is also 10 centimeters. The roof is now below the parapet, which was the main issue that we were receiving feedback on.
But it's only below the parapet by 10 centimeters, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And did staff have any concerns with the fact that this site was encompassed by zoning, R3 zoning, with height limits that had a much lower height limit, I think 9 to 11 meters?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, when making the staff recommendation to committee and council originally, that of course would have been one of the major considerations, particularly on the other side of Galt Street, where you have the R3 zoning, and on the south side of Elmer, and there's significant step backs associated in with the proposed apartment building as they relate to those R3 zones, and also facing the R3 zones on the other side of Elmer are townhouse in area G on on the schedule, which are typically allowed in R3. So certainly it was a major consideration of staff in getting a development that was considered compatible with the surrounding R3 zoning.
And do you consider that the issues that were raised by the NCC and I believe also Parks Canada with respect to the uncluttered views from the canal, and that the natural landscape being a character-defining element of that piece? Do you think that we are recognizing that? And do you think that it's if we had the NCC and Parks Canada here today, I'm not sure that they would agree with us. And I just wonder what the difference is between your opinion on that and theirs.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, we have had conversations with the NCC, further conversations. They will be included in the future UDRP panel discussions that will take place. I think we've been very open. Our planner, Alison Hamlin, has been meeting regularly with the NCC, so I think everyone is recognizing the issues that they have raised. But we've also clarified that we do not have any policy direction that limits our ability to develop in this particular area as a result of the height of trees. And certainly Ms. Hamlin will be working with Windmill to work on mitigation measures as we move forward with site plan on this file.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Just a question to staff, because it's, or to Councillor Chernyshенko, because it just wasn't clear to me in the motion. Yesterday in the schedule that was circulated, there was a new step back in area E at the top story on the north side of 1 meter. Is that still proposed to be maintained in the draft motion before us?
Yes, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I believe what the councillor is referring to is a step back along the canal, and that is still to be incorporated within. It's in the zoning there in the new schedule, and to be incorporated within the building as it's constructed.
Okay, thank you. I just will offer a comment. I moved the original motion from Planning Committee because I thought that it was worth another kick at the can to see whether or not this building could be lowered before the parapet and maybe respond to the concerns expressed by residents and some of the federal agencies at play. I can say that this is not quite as ambitious an outcome as I would have liked to have seen. I would have thought that there would have been an opportunity to lower the height by more than 60 centimeters on a height of a building of that height. That being said, we were clear in the motion that we put forward at planning that we were giving that role to staff to work with the proponent, and this is what the outcome is. I will say that the proponent has communicated that there would be an interest in further refining this plan at UDRP, which I think is important. And so while if council is prepared to agree to the schedule as such, I think the message should be that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities for further improvement of this proposal, and I would certainly encourage staff to continue to work with the applicant to see whether or not further refinement at UDRP and at site plan could address some of these issues that have come up. We haven't spoken about the mechanical on top and whether or not geothermal or other mitigating energy sources will help resolve that. But these are all, I think, pertinent issues and would encourage staff to continue to work on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Chernyshенko, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm in a bit of an unusual position of my own choosing in actually moving a motion which is recommending that my colleagues accept this motion, accept this amendment, and ultimately accepts this project. That's unusual because on a project where the community is quite divided and there are some quite passionate voices in opposition, the easiest thing for me to be doing is to say, well, I'll vote against it, and then leave the hard work of voting for it to my colleagues. I'm not going to do that. And I'm not going to do that because this is truly a conflicted file in front of us. You will have seen the emails coming in waves over the last number of months. The dozens of emails against it, arguing why it's not compatible with the existing residential fabric of the immediately adjacent streets, concerns about the viewscape from the canal and from Bank Street, possible excessive density. Then you will have received the waves of emails from the advocates of the project explaining that it's the best attempt to do compatible infill that is both contemplated within the official plan and also allows for the Southminster Church to continue not just as a church but as an important cultural institution, a deliverer of social services, of cultural events, of scouts and after out of the cold suppers and many other things. What we find is two objectives that, if not in conflict, there certainly aren't completely complementary either. There's a desire to allow for a viable future for this important institution, as well as a desire to promote good planning and compatible infill and development in the neighborhood. I saw my goal as trying to see those reconciled. Of course, it's not my project. So I'm not the one who brought it forward and said, please build this. I'm also not one who has said, please stop this at all costs. I recognize the importance of the institution and the importance of trying to achieve an outcome that accomplished all of those things. You could say that was an impossible goal because accomplishing all of that to everybody's satisfaction, achieving the economic outcome for the applicant, the church, and the developer that they had chosen, as well as protecting all of the requests, desires, needs of the immediate community may not have been possible. I bring this forward to you now, not arguing against it, not planning to vote against it myself, for the simple reason that I believe it's the best outcome that I can achieve and the best outcome perhaps that we can achieve with the rules we have in front of us and with the process that we have followed. I know full well I will take criticism for not having achieved quite enough on either side perhaps, but I do believe it does allow for an imperfect but still quite complementary project on this site, and I do know that there will be plenty of people who had wished it could be lower. I had wished it could be lower. In the end, with the economic imperative of the applicants, something that we can never see the books opened and argue for or against. That was as far as they were willing to go, and short of using other tools outside of a council decision, I believe this is the best we can achieve here today. So for that reason, I will be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you for that very challenging file. Thank you for your diligence on this and working with all of the parties in your community. So on that, is the motion carried? Carried. And on the report, dissent by Councillor McKenney. And on the report as amended? Carried. All right. The next item is motion to adopt reports. Councillor Blais, please.
What about 67? I thought David held 667 back.
Councillor Moffat is mentioning something else. I don't know.
David, didn't you hold 667 back? We did that. We're good? No, we're good. Oh, we're good.
Yeah.
That the remaining following reports, excluding those items previously adopted by Council as part of the budget, be received and adopted as amended. 1, Agriculture and Rural Affairs Committee Report 30. 2, Audit Committee Report 14. Community and Protective Services Committee Report 28. Environment and Climate Protection Committee Report 17. Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 30. Planning Committee Report 55, Planning Committee Report 56, Transportation Committee Report 29, the report from the City Clerk and Solicitor's Office entitled Planning Advisory Committee Establishment, the report from the City Clerk and Solicitor's Office entitled Status Update Councillor Inquiries and Motions for the period ending December 8, 2017, and the report from the City Clerk and Solicitor's Office entitled Summary of Oral and Written Public Submissions for Items Subject to Bill 73 Explanation Requirements at the City Council meeting of 22 November 2017.
I think there's another page.
That the bylaws on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings be read and passed. No? Apologize, it's the rest of the motion. Okay, but there's 2 items missing. It goes from number 11 to number 14. I'm not sure. Well, anyways, Transit Commission Report 16 and item 3 of Transportation Committee Report 29, and that any dissents and declarations of interest recorded during the Committee of the Whole session be deemed to be recorded in the Council session.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Carried. Thank you. Notices of motion, or motions of which notice has been previously given. Councillor Harder, please.
I was wrong.
Is there 3 missing?
No.
No? Okay.
11 was it.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. This is the establishment of Councillor Sponsors Group for R4 study. And as you know, we have staff have undertaken the important work for an R4 study. And this would be approving a sponsors group of the councillors that are in the areas that would be most impacted by R4. And they are, therefore, be it resolved that Council approve a sponsors group for the R4 study comprised of Councillor Brockington, Councillor Fleury, Councillor Leeper, and Councillor Turnachenko.
Thank you very much. Is that carried? Carried. Thank you. Motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure? I have none. Notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meetings? I have none. Motion to introduce bylaws. Councillor Blais, please.
Thank you that the bylaws listed on the agenda under motions to introduce bylaw, 3 readings be read and passed.
Carried. Confirmation bylaw?
That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of council meeting of December 13, 2017.
Carried. Inquiries? I have no written inquiries at this time. Adjournment?
That the proceedings of the City Council meeting of December 13, 2017 be adjourned.
Carried? Carried. And with that, this is the final meeting of the year, so the Chair wishes everyone happy holidays and Merry Christmas. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hey, hey. Good.
Hey, hey. Ho, ho.